Hi everyone, it's Yoselyn with Remax Realty team bringing you this month's Market Snapshot.
Today, we're going to look beyond headlines and beyond opinions. Every day, consumers are exposed to more real estate information than at any point in history. Market reports, social media posts, news articles, interest rate updates, and endless predictions all compete for attention. The challenge isn't finding the information. The challenge is understanding what actually matters. The purpose of this presentation is to take a complex market and simplify it into a clear story that buyers, sellers, investors, and real estate professionals can use to make better decisions. Because successful real estate decisions are rarely based on emotion. They're based on understanding what the numbers are really telling us. When most people analyze the market, they look at dozens of statistics and often end up more confused than when they started. In reality, there are 4 core measurements that explain almost everything happening in a housing market. Together, they answer 4 important questions. How much inventory exists? How quickly is it being consumed? Where is buyer demand concentrated? And how long does it take for the market to respond? Once we understand those 4 pieces, the rest of the market story begins to reveal itself. Now let's apply that framework to Lee County. One of the biggest mistakes people make is treating real estate as a national market. It isn't. Real estate is local. The conditions in Lee County can be dramatically different than what's happening nationally, statewide, or even in neighboring counties. That's why local intelligence matters. The goal isn't to understand the housing market. The goal is to understand our housing market. Inventory tells us something very important about market leverage. Not leverage for buyers, not leverage for sellers, but leverage overall. When supply begins shrinking, competition naturally increases because buyers are competing for fewer available options. What's important here isn't the inventory count itself, it's the direction. Markets often change direction long before headlines notice. When available inventory begins declining, it suggests that demand is quietly absorbing supply beneath the surface. That shift becomes the foundation for everything we'll discuss next. Inventory tells us what's available. Absorption tells us what's happening. This is one of the most powerful indicators in real estate because it measures action instead of opinion. People can talk about uncertainty, they can talk about waiting, but contracts reveal behavior. When homes continue moving into pending status, buyers are voting with their wallets. The significance isn't that homes are selling. It's that buyers remain active despite higher rates, higher insurance costs, and affordability challenges. That's a signal worth paying attention to. Price is where supply and demand finally meet. Many people focus on average prices, but average prices can be influenced by luxury sales and outliers. To understand the real market, we need to look deeper. Every market has a center of gravity, a place where the largest concentration of buyers and sellers naturally meet. When affordability becomes a larger concern, buyer activity tends to cluster around specific price ranges. That doesn't mean that higher-end homes stop selling. It means that consumer behavior becomes more selective and more intentional. The strongest markets are often found where affordability and demand intersect. And one of the most misunderstood statistics in real estate is days on the market. Many consumers assume longer marketing times automatically indicate weakness. In reality, days on the market often reveal expectations. In highly competitive markets, almost everything sells quickly. In more balanced market, buyers have time to compare options. That doesn't mean demand disappears. It means pricing, presentation, and positioning become more important. Today's market rewards accuracy more than urgency, and that's a healthy characteristic of a functioning market. Now, to understand where we're going, we first need to understand where we've been. Every market cycle creates its own narrative: fear, optimism, confidence, speculation, correction, then balance. The mistake many consumers make is assuming that whatever happened most recently will continue forever, and history tells us otherwise. Markets evolve, they adjust, and eventually they seek equilibrium. That's why understanding cycles is far more valuable than reacting to headlines. The last 15 years plus have given us completely different markets. We experienced recovery, then expansion, and then one of the most aggressive housing booms in modern history. And now we're experiencing something many people have forgotten: normality. The conditions that created the rapid appreciation of 2020 through 2022 were extraordinary. Those conditions were never designed to last forever. And today's market isn't being driven by panic. It's being driven by affordability, consumer caution, and more rational decision making. And that's a very different environment than what we're experiencing during the financial crisis. The future is where people often want certainty, but certainty doesn't exist. What exists are probabilities. The most responsible approach isn't predicting exactly what will happen, it's understanding what could happen. Real estate markets respond to employment, migration, interest rates, affordability, consumer confidence, and supply. Those variables create multiple possible outcomes. And the good news is that today's data suggests a market seeking balance rather than extreme movement in either direction. And historically, balanced markets tend to create the healthiest conditions for both buyers and sellers. Every market inside Lee County has its own personality, and Cape Coral tends to be driven by lifestyle, waterfront appeal, retirement, migration, and emotional purchasing decisions. Because emotions play a larger role, this market often experiences larger swings during both up cycles and down cycles. And when confidence returns, Cape Coral tends to react quickly. And when uncertainty increases, it can react quickly as well. Understanding that personality helps buyers and sellers make more informed decisions. Fort Myers is often the stabilizing force within Lee County. Its diversity of employment, housing options, healthcare, retail, and business activity creates resilience. Markets with multiple demand drivers tend to experience fewer dramatic swings. That's why Fort Myers frequently serves as a useful benchmark for understanding overall market health. North Fort Myers represents something many buyers and investors search for: opportunity. Markets that remain relatively affordable while surrounding areas appreciate often attract future attention. That doesn't guarantee appreciation, but it does create conditions where buyers begin looking more closely. Value tends to attract demand, and demand often creates future momentum. Lehigh Acres continues to tell an affordability story. As housing costs increase throughout the region, many buyers naturally expand their search areas. Affordability doesn't simply create transaction, it creates necessity. And necessity tends to be one of the strongest drivers of housing demand. That's why affordable markets often remain surprisingly resilient. Are prices crashing? This is one of the most common questions consumers ask, and it's understandable. Headlines are designed to capture attention, and attention often comes from fear. But real estate decisions should never be based solely on national narratives. They should be based on local evidence. When we compare what we're hearing to what we're seeing, the story becomes much clearer. The numbers don't suggest panic, they suggest transition. And that's a very important difference between those two things. Is this another 2008? The comparison to 2008 appears whenever markets slow down, but comparisons only work when causes are similar. The conditions that created the financial crisis were fundamentally different than the conditions we see today. Different causes create different outcomes. That's why understanding the why behind market movement is often more important than simply observing the movement itself. History is valuable, but context is everything. Should I wait? Waiting sounds safe, but waiting is still a decision. Every real estate decision involves trade-offs. A better market for seller can create challenges for buyers, and a better market for buyers can create challenges for sellers. That's why timing is really the most important variable. Preparation, strategy, and execution typically matter far more than attempting to perfectly predict the future. The best time to make a move is when your personal circumstances align with your goals. Why isn't my home selling? The market gives feedback. The question is whether we're listening. Every listing receives a response from buyers. Sometimes that response is immediate, sometimes it's silence. Neither's personal, and both are information. When we remove emotion and focus on feedback, solutions become easier to identify. The market doesn't reward wishful thinking, it rewards alignment between value, presentation, and buyer expectations. In today's environment, consumers don't need more information, they need interpretation. They need someone who can separate noise from signal, someone who understands not only what numbers say, but what they mean. The value of a real estate professional has never been access to information. The value has always been judgment. And in a world overwhelmed with data, good judgment becomes even more valuable. As we wrap up, remember this: markets change, headlines change, predictions change, but the fundamentals remain remarkably consistent: supply, demand, price, and time. And when we understand those four forces, uncertainty becomes clarity, and clarity becomes confidence. Whether you're buying, selling, investing, or advising clients, the goal isn't to predict the future. The goal is to understand the present well enough to make smart decisions moving forward.
Thanks for watching. See you again next month. And remember, success is your only option.